I was, 23, and such nasty, vicious things written about us. Really awful things. I don't think her illness was handled properly.
Is that something that still gnaws at you?
Yes.
For years, Richard Carpenter had remained cautious, speaking around the edges of the story, letting his sister's music speak, while the truth lingered in whispers. Now he confirmed what many had long suspected, but few truly understood. And the reality is far darker and far more complex than the world had ever known. At 79, Richard Carpenter has finally confirmed the rumors about his sister, and we'll unveil everything. The silence before the spotlight. It was not uncertainty that kept him quiet. It was grief, restraint, and the raw pain of remembering a life that had ended too soon. The world knew his sister Karen as a voice that seemed to float effortlessly through airwaves. But behind that voice lay a story of pressure, expectation, and a childhood shaped by unspoken hierarchies. Karen Carpenter was born on March 2, 1950, in New Haven, Connecticut, the younger of two children in a household where music dominated every corner. Her older brother, Richard, born on October 15, 1946, displayed early signs of prodigious talent. He grasped piano and accordion with ease, absorbed music theory like a sponge, and practiced with a seriousness that impressed adults around him. Their mother, Agnes Carpenter, established a household code that left little room for deviation. Richard was to excel, and Karen was to support. If Richard stumbled, blame sometimes fell on Karen. If Karen succeeded in ways that challenged his place, she was corrected or dismissed. Even seemingly innocent childhood moments carried implicit lessons. When Karen outperformed Richard in a neighborhood baseball game, Agnes responded with anger. The message was clear. She could not disturb the established order. Gentle and soft-spoken, Harold Carpenter was born in China to missionary parents. He valued harmony over conflict. When Agnes dominated decisions, Harold rarely intervened. He loved his children and music alike, but his passivity allowed the household hierarchy to cement itself. Karen internalized these patterns early, learning to minimize her presence, temper her ambitions, and remain agreeable. She absorbed music in isolation, listening attentively to her father's records, noting phrasing and harmony without comment. While Richard performed in local clubs, Karen's role remained observational. She practiced privately, mastering melodies and rhythms in silence. By 13, she had developed a keen ear and a sensitivity to musical nuance that rivaled her brother's, though acknowledgement remained elusive. Richard's early successes further entrenched the imbalance. By his teens, he was already performing professionally in clubs across California, sometimes misrepresenting his age to secure gigs. The family relocated from Connecticut to Downey, California, in June 1963. Karen's life, once again, was treated as adjustable. From Connecticut to California, a family's ambition. Karen Carpenter was only 13 when the family relocated to Downey, California. A burgeoning suburb in Los Angeles County, Downey offered immediate access to studios, music teachers, and performance venues. Richard wasted no time. Within months, he was performing in local clubs, sometimes bending the truth about his age to secure gigs. The family supported him openly. Karen, meanwhile, observed from the sidelines. Her new school offered band programs and extracurriculars, but her focus remained disciplined and self-contained. Even in this environment, Karen's exposure to music deepened. Harold's record collection had traveled with the family to California, filling their new home with jazz, classical pieces, and contemporary popular recordings. Karen absorbed these sounds meticulously, noting phrasing, harmony, and rhythm with an analytical ear. She practiced drums and other instruments in private, driven by a desire to belong rather than by external validation. While Richard was the public figure, performing in clubs and gaining recognition, Karen honed her craft in quiet isolation, developing precision, control, and a deep understanding of musical structure. The shift to California accelerated the family's professional ambitions. Richard's performances increasingly drew attention from local talent scouts and club owners, and by 1965, he had formed the Richard Carpenter Trio. Karen, at 15, joined as the drummer, an unusual position for a teenager, particularly a female drummer at the time. Their early gigs were modest but technically demanding, and they performed at venues such as the Hollywood Bowl's Battle of the Bands in June 1966. The group won, securing a contract with RCA Records, though the label ultimately shelved their recordings. Recognition for Karen's skill remained muted. The spotlight focused on Richard's arrangements and piano work. Awards such as the John Phillips Sousa Band Award highlighted her technical proficiency, but the family's emotional attention remained tethered to Richard's accomplishments. By the time the Carpenters were signed to A&M Records in 1969, she had developed both the technical skill and mental fortitude to sustain the pressures of performance, even as recognition for her contributions remained limited. Downey provided access to music opportunities and performance venues that Connecticut could not, yet the cost was constant adaptation and invisibility. Finding a voice behind the drums. In her early teens at Downey High School, Karen Carpenter's entry into the school band began almost by accident. Initially assigned to the glockenspiel, she found the instrument thin, unengaging, and incapable of expressing the energy she felt inside. One day, she noticed a fellow student playing the drums, and something clicked. She begged to switch instruments. Her parents agreed to purchase a Ludwig drum kit for approximately $300, a significant expense at the time, and Karen began what would become an obsessive commitment to her craft. The drum kit quickly became Karen's sanctuary. Behind the kit, she discovered a space where she could assert control, a private domain in a household that consistently prioritized her brother Richard's achievements. Her father, Harold, continued to offer passive support, while her mother, Agnes, maintained her focus on Richard's advancement. The drums were thus a shield, a way for Karen to navigate an environment that consistently minimized her presence. Through the physicality of rhythm, she could carve out identity and agency in a world that otherwise treated her as secondary. Karen's practice was relentless. Under the guidance of jazz instructor Bill Douglas, she drilled paradiddles, triplets, and marching patterns until her fingers bled. Bandages were kept close at hand. Douglas later recalled that Karen's aptitude was extraordinary, noting her precision, timing, and intuitive grasp of complex rhythms well beyond what most teenagers could achieve. By the age of 15, she had developed technical skills that rivaled many professional drummers, an accomplishment made all the more remarkable by the limited recognition she received in her family's eyes. In 1965, at 15 years old, Karen joined the Richard Carpenter Trio as the drummer. The group, which included Richard on piano and arrangement duties, featured a tuba doubling as a bass and unconventional instrumental arrangements that departed from standard pop structures. The trio performed locally, honing their ensemble work and refining their repertoire. The trio's dedication culminated in June 1966 at the Hollywood Bowl's Battle of the Bands. Here, the Richard Carpenter Trio emerged victorious. The win led to a contract with RCA Records, a major label eager to capitalize on their talent. Yet the recordings that followed were never released. RCA shelved the project and quietly dropped the group. Karen's contributions were substantial, her drumming critical to the sound and cohesion of the trio, but the commercial machinery of the music industry continued to center on Richard. Even in these early stages, the discrepancy between her technical accomplishments and public acknowledgement became a pattern. Karen's drumming was technically sophisticated, commanding, and innovative. Yet she remained largely invisible to audiences and critics. By the end of the 1960s, Karen's identity as a drummer had been solidly formed. Her precision, stamina, and musical intuition placed her among the most skilled young percussionists of her generation. Yet recognition remained uneven. Still, the drums had served their purpose. They had given Karen a space to define herself. Now, she had to claim the greater spotlight that she truly deserved. fame, visibility, and vulnerability. In April 1969, Karen and Richard Carpenter signed a recording contract with A&M Records, a milestone that transformed their garage demos into fully produced studio recordings. The label recognized the potential of their harmonious blend and Richard's intricate arrangements. Yet, the process of translating home recordings into polished tracks demanded rapid adaptation. Karen, who had built her early musical identity behind the drum kit, found herself stepping into unfamiliar territory as a front-stage performer. A touring drummer, Cubby O'Brien, was hired to take over percussion duties. This transition marked the beginning of intense visibility. By the early 1970s, Karen's role shifted from rhythm to center stage, positioned not behind the drums, but in full view of audiences. The change amplified both public exposure and professional expectations. Karen's meticulous control over her instrument had provided a sense of stability. Now, without the barrier of the drum kit, she confronted a relentless spotlight. Fans, television producers, and executives all focused on her presence, her expressions, and her demeanor, demanding perfection with every performance. The psychological impact of this sudden vulnerability intensified the pressures already present from years of family and industry dynamics. Despite the personal cost, the Carpenters' commercial success escalated rapidly. Their 1970 single, They Long to Be Close to You, composed by Burt Bacharach and Hal David, climbed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, marking a breakthrough that catapulted Karen into international recognition. Later that same year, We've Only Just Begun, written by Roger Nichols and Paul Williams, further solidified their position in the pop charts, also peaking within the top 5. By 1973, Top of the World continued the streak of chart-topping hits, combining Karen's signature vocal clarity with Richard's lush arrangements. These songs not only earned critical acclaim, but also Grammy recognition, with the Carpenters receiving multiple nominations and awards for vocal performance and arrangement between 1970 and 1974. While the music industry celebrated the duo's success, Karen's personal struggles became increasingly visible to those closest to her. The constant touring, recording sessions, and television appearances amplified scrutiny of her appearance. Karen's petite frame, already slender at 5 feet 4 inches, became a point of comment from fans and media. By the early 1970s, subtle signs of anorexia nervosa began to emerge. Weight fluctuations, fatigue, and heightened anxiety accompanied her performances, though these indicators were often misinterpreted as discipline or vanity by those unfamiliar with the severity of the disorder. Family members, producers, and peers recognized some of the changes, but lacked both understanding and resources to intervene effectively. Karen's shift from drummer to lead singer also removed her ability to mediate anxiety through physical engagement. Playing drums had allowed her to channel energy, focus attention, and create a protective boundary between herself and the audience. Without this anchor, she experienced heightened self-consciousness and a profound sense of exposure. While the public applauded her technical mastery and emotive voice, Karen confronted an internal landscape of pressure, insecurity, and the first tangible consequences of an illness that would later dominate her life. Television appearances, including recurring spots on shows like The Carol Burnett Show and The Andy Williams Show, exposed Karen to millions of viewers. Producers emphasized visual presentation as much as musical talent, requesting consistent smiles, poised posture, and flawless execution under studio lights. Karen complied with these demands, masking her distress behind professional discipline. Through it all, her voice remained extraordinary. Richard's arrangements, combining soft rock sensibilities with orchestral textures, amplified her clarity and range, producing a sound that dominated adult contemporary charts. Between 1970 and 1974, the Carpenters achieved 11 top 10 singles on the Billboard Hot 100, including 4 that reached #1, solidifying both their commercial dominance and Karen's visibility as a performer. However, as public attention mounted, the underlying health crisis escalated quietly. The pressures of fame, the relentless touring schedules, and the industry's focus on appearance over well-being converged with pre-existing anxieties, producing a condition that would intensify throughout the decade. While the world celebrated Karen Carpenter's vocal brilliance, the protective cocoon of the drum kit had vanished. Her troubles with anorexia were consuming her piece by piece. Pressure, misunderstanding, and decline. By the mid-1970s, Karen Carpenter's life had become a delicate balancing act between public acclaim and private suffering. The Carpenters' popularity continued to soar, with albums such as A Song for You, released in 1972, and Now and Then, released in 1973, cementing their place in the top echelons of the pop charts. Yet, behind the scenes, Karen's health was declining, imperceptible to the millions of fans who admired her pristine vocals and composed stage presence. Eating disorders were scarcely understood in the public sphere, especially in the entertainment industry, and anorexia nervosa was often dismissed as extreme dieting or mere vanity. The combination of a controlling parent, a passive one, and an industry that prized flawless performance over well-being created a vacuum. In this void, Karen's illness could silently intensify. Richard Carpenter, for his part, was also struggling. By the late 1970s, he had developed an addiction to prescription sleeping pills, a dependence born of exhaustion from relentless touring, recording, and production responsibilities. He eventually sought rehabilitation, entering treatment to regain control over his health. Yet during this period, his own vulnerabilities meant that his capacity to support Karen was limited. Despite her deteriorating health, Karen continued performing. The Carpenters' live tours and television appearances demanded unwavering precision and professionalism. Between 1975 and 1977, the group performed in major venues across North America, including repeated appearances at New York's Radio City Music Hall and Los Angeles' Shrine Auditorium. Each night required Karen to maintain poise, execute flawless vocal phrasing, and engage audiences visually, even as her energy levels and physical strength declined. The discipline that had once empowered her behind the drums became a mechanism of survival, masking the severity of her internal struggle. However, the cumulative pressures were relentless. Perfectionism, cultivated over years of family scrutiny and professional expectation, compounded the stress of touring schedules and recording deadlines. Producers, executives, and fans emphasized her visual presentation as much as her vocal talent, scrutinizing her weight, posture, and appearance. Each public performance became a high-stakes negotiation with both external judgment and internal insecurity. Control over her body became, in effect, the only domain where Karen could exert absolute authority, a dangerous substitution for the autonomy denied in so many other aspects of her life. By the late 1970s, the consequences of sustained neglect became visible. Karen appeared increasingly fragile during performances, her thin frame drawing attention from journalists and photographers. Fans noted subtle changes in her face, posture, and energy. She was thinner, more exhausted, and visibly anxious under stage lights. Though the Carpenters' records continued to dominate charts, including passage and singles that reached the top 10 on Billboard's adult contemporary listings, the public remained largely unaware of the life-threatening illness that shadowed her success. Recognition focused on talent, yet the human being sustaining it was crumbling. Internally, Karen's anxiety and distress intensified. Public acclaim and private deterioration advanced in parallel, a cruel inversion of success. While audiences celebrated chart-topping hits like Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft and continued radio play of earlier classics, Karen's body and psyche weakened. By 1980, her condition had reached a critical stage. Energy levels were depleted, vulnerability to infection increased, and emotional resilience eroded. The juxtaposition of professional triumph and personal decline was stark, highlighting how fame, family dynamics, and industry misunderstanding had converged to produce a crisis unseen by those most enchanted by her voice. Karen Carpenter's trajectory in the 1970s demonstrated the perilous intersection of brilliance and neglect. The industry rewarded her talent while obscuring the human cost. The family structured her success while failing to confront its dangers. Even Richard, later reflecting on the decade, acknowledged that neither he nor their parents fully grasped the severity of the illness as it unfolded. By the end of the decade, the stage was set for tragedy. Legacy, truth, and reflection. Karen Carpenter died on February 4, 1983, at the age of 32 in Downey, California. Her passing, officially attributed to heart failure related to complications from anorexia nervosa, shocked fans worldwide. News outlets reported the death with a mixture of admiration for her talent and confusion over the cause. In the years that followed, Richard Carpenter remained largely silent about the circumstances surrounding his sister's illness. Interviews focused on music, chart-topping hits, and the Carpenters' influence on the soft rock and adult contemporary genres. Even as journalists speculated about her health and the rumors circulated, Richard avoided confirming details publicly. His focus on preserving Karen's musical legacy often meant sidestepping the more painful truths. It was not until Richard entered his 70s that he began addressing the truth directly. In interviews conducted in the late 2010s and early 2020s, he acknowledged that Karen's struggle with anorexia nervosa had been far more severe than public perception suggested. He emphasized that her illness emerged from a combination of family dynamics, intense industry scrutiny, and personal vulnerability. He described the illness not as a result of vanity or choice, but as a complex interaction of social, psychological, and professional forces that overwhelmed his sister. Richard reflected candidly on the role of their parents. Agnes Carpenter, he said, had maintained a controlling presence that reinforced expectations and demanded conformity, while Harold Carpenter's gentle, conflict-averse nature prevented him from intervening effectively. These family dynamics, coupled with the unrelenting demands of fame, meant that Karen's early coping mechanisms, her meticulousness, perfectionism, and control over her body, became destructive. Richard also admitted that he wished he had intervened sooner, that he had recognized the severity of Karen's suffering before it became irreversible. He described the loss not only of her life, but of a voice he regarded as extraordinarily rare, a voice that, he believed, would have continued evolving and inspiring for decades had she survived. The music industry celebrated Karen's professionalism and extraordinary talent, yet it had failed to protect the artist behind the voice, leaving Richard with decades of private grief and questions about what might have been. He stressed that acknowledging her illness, her vulnerability, and the systemic pressures she faced was not meant to diminish her achievements, but rather to frame her as a human being, not a myth. Karen's voice, her creativity, and her contribution to music remained extraordinary, but understanding the challenges she faced added depth to her story. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.